Hello, beautiful people. Today I want to talk about what is literary memoir. This is for those of you who want to write a memoir and want to get published traditionally. So you want to write a personal story, or you are writing, or you have written a personal story, and you want to get traditionally published. I'm really speaking to those of you who have the yearning that I had, which was to create something very worthwhile, a work of art, a literary work of art that would be picked up by a traditional publisher from your own personal story. Now, I need to talk about what is memoir before I can even teach you how to write a memoir, because I actually believe that this is the hardest literary category to define, the most misconceived, the most misinterpreted, and particularly when it comes to traditional publishing, because for those of you who want to be traditionally published and you're not a celebrity, you're not famous, this is who I'm talking to here. I'm talking to me, basically. I'm not famous, I'm not a celebrity, but I wanted to write a story based on something that I had lived through and experienced, and I wanted it to be published, a work of literary, a book. So the reason that I need to really clear things up around what is memoir is actually, well, I'm going to tell you about it, but it's based on my own experiences pitching and getting rejected by publishers, getting published. I've actually had, if this is the first video you've seen of mine, I've had 2 memoirs traditionally published. My first was Love and Other U-Turns, which you can see here, was published in 2010 by Allen and Unwin, which is an award-winning independent publisher in Australia. My second memoir, A Letter from Paris, was very, very challenging and very, very difficult to write because it is it's a combination of memoir and biography of my late father, history. There is some travel pieces in there too. And I'm going to talk about a couple of other memoirs in this presentation, I guess you call it, today. One is My Salinger Year by Joanna Rakoff, because I really love this book, and I think it really exemplifies what I want to talk about today, which is writing for the traditional publishing market, to a wide market when you're not a celebrity, but perhaps there is a celebrity or a known figure or a relevant figure in your story. And this is really important for what I want to share with you about that. Here's another memoir I'm going to mention today. It's called The Red Leather Diary by Lily Koppel. And this was really, really illuminating to me when I was working on a book that got rejected, which I'll tell you about, which I thought was a memoir. So that brings me to the topic of this class, and that is, what is memoir? So many people think that memoir is something that it's not. So I need to give you examples here. And part of the problem is, in traditional publishing, the memoirs that we see on the bestseller list very often, or getting a lot of coverage and marketing and media, things like celebrity memoirs, the Obamas, Harry, the royal, I think he had something like 40 million copies were printed and sold. But that is not the type of memoir that I wrote and sold and got published, and that is not literary memoir, what I'm talking about today. So I really want to talk about the type of memoir that you are working on, if you're watching this video, is a personal story based on your own experiences. It's a nonfiction, and perhaps you don't know it's a memoir. Perhaps you think it is some other type of nonfiction, or like me with this book that I was pitching to publishers, you are calling it a memoir when it is not. Now, the big problem here is with self-publishing, there is a lot of self-publishing. It's skyrocketed in the last 10 years, particularly because publishing your own book has become simpler and simpler thanks to Amazon and print on demand and all of these self-publishing. It just changes in the digital landscape and in the publishing landscape. And even the traditional publishing landscape has changed in terms of how they're offering marketing and advances and things like that. But it has not changed in terms of what traditional publishers and what agents want from a memoir when you are not a celebrity. So what they'll pick up, what they will say yes to, as they did to me twice, and what will get published. Now, I think that there's so many misconceptions around memoir because a lot of self-published authors, and also the ease of self-publishing, the ease of calling yourself a publishing company or a publisher. You can literally get an ISBN for something that you've written. It could be one page, it could be 500 pages. If you get an ISBN for that, call it a book and whack it on Amazon, you can call yourself a publisher. So there's a lot of people walking around saying, okay, I've got this memoir, or I've written a memoir, da, 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 da. It could be fictional or semi-fictional. That is not a memoir. It could be a collection of notes or letters. That is not a memoir. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. It could be their complete life story. That's an autobiography, but it is not a literary memoir. And that's not the kind of story that sells. So I really want to speak on this, and the reason I'm speaking on this is because I had a very heartbreaking or sort of confusing rejection from an agent. She'd represented me for one book, but didn't want this particular book, which I was pitching as a memoir. Now, if you've read, I don't want this to only apply if you've read my second book, but in A Letter from Paris, I talk about discovering my late father's travel narrative in the State Library of Victoria. So there was a printed and bound manuscript that he'd written in 1955 that I found in the State Library of Victoria. Now, as soon as I found it and dove right into it, I wanted to get it published. I wanted it to be the sequel to A Letter from Paris. And it was a very lengthy process to even get it photocopied because it's in this special manuscripts collection at the State Library. There's only one printed and bound copy there. So to even read it, I had to make various appointments to get it into a format that I could, leaf through and read at home. Otherwise, I was going in and making appointments and reading, say, 50 pages at a time, which isn't the best way to read a book and really understand and absorb what it is. Anyway, so I had it on my heart to get my father's book, late father's book, published. And when A Letter from Paris was going really well, when it came out, it got reprinted overseas and in America and in Canada, various places. And an agent reached out to me, and we talked about my father's memoir, and I talked about, how can we get this in front of publishers? How can we make it the sequel? Da 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 da. I've been through a lot of publisher and agent conversations about my late father's memoir, and this is what's really going to be valuable to those of you who may not know what fits into the category of memoir, because I've learnt so much more from rejections and rewriting things and revising things, and these conversations over pitches and why they fell short, or what they wanted me to do to the manuscript afterwards, that have taught me so much about the memoir genre. Almost as much as I learnt from writing 2 memoirs, but I really do think that rejection is a very, very good teacher, because it basically just is a lack of information. You don't have enough data. So I was not interested in self-publishing Dad's book. I wanted it traditionally published. I wanted it sitting side by side with A Letter from Paris in bookstores. And The reason that I love traditional publishing and I'm not interested in self-publishing, I have deeply considered it with Dad's book because it kept getting rejected. I just it doesn't feel like art to me because of the fact that people can just publish a page and call that a book. And there is absolutely no vetting process with self-publishing, and you know the quality and the standard and the knowledge and the skill level of everyone involved, from editors to whoever designs the cover, it just varies so vastly because these aren't publishing professionals who have dedicated their life and their career to books, who are self-publishing. It's mainly just people that go, okay, I've got a book in me and I want to get it out, and it doesn't have that level of time. Long-lasting time and care. Usually they don't get stocked in bookstores as well. So anyway, not to say that there aren't some really high quality self-published books, and I have a few on my bookshelves, but overall I'm just not interested in self-publishing. I love traditional publishing because it is so hard. Probably because it was so hard to get my two books not just written to the standard that would be accepted, but published, printed overseas, republished, reprinted, and they had that just gives them that, to me, that it gives it that stamp of, yes, this is quality work, and it has been vetted by professionals who know the market, who know memoir, who know books, who know literature, and they will raise up my work by taking it on. So that's why I just want to really clearly differentiate between self-publishing and traditional publishing, because a lot of people say, I'm just going to self-publish my memoir, and that it doesn't really have the same. It is. I'm going to be completely honest here. I do think it is a lot more difficult to traditionally publish a memoir than self-publish, and the marketing and the publicity side is a lot bigger and more. It is tougher when you are traditionally published because you are not choosing, who to pitch to. You are not choosing whether or not you even do any marketing. If you self-publish, you can just give 20 copies to your family and friends and that's it. But when you traditionally go with a traditional publisher, being part of that marketing and publicity process is part of your job as an author. And with memoir, that is your story, your life, your deep truth, your authentic self that is being publicized, because a memoir is about its author more than anyone else in the story. And this can be very grueling if you are, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Most writers that I know are introverts anyway, but publicity for a memoir, and you can read many interviews with memoirists such as Mary Carr or Stephanie Land, whose Maid was an instant bestseller and became a Netflix series. Just the level of interaction with the public over your own personal story is quite it's quite breathtaking. So anyway, and this is part of what makes memoir so unique and so challenging, is you need to become not just the narrator of your own life, but you also need to step outside yourself and see this as just a story, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to do the publicity or the marketing for it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What I really want to talk about here is, first of all, what memoir is not. So memoir is not a fictional account of your life with some names changed. Memoir is not a complete, birth to old age autobiography. Celebrities and very famous people can get away with a story like that. But memoir that I teach, literary memoir, is a narrative, and at heart, it is a character narrative. And this is something that I really needed to understand when I was trying to get my dad's memoir traditionally published, because I did actually get offers of deals for dad's book. I'm going to stop calling it a memoir, because I've realized through a lot of work and introspection that the travel book that he had written in 1955, because that was such a different time in history, in culturally, socially, in literature, in publishing, even a travel memoir was written so differently then that it was that particular book he'd called France in the 50s, and then he'd scrolled that out and written France, Australia, and a Tall, Tall Man, because it involved a lot of Australians who went to Paris and the south of France after World War II. But the way that he wrote it was, I loved it because it was my dad, and it was the first. It was a big deal for me to find this, because I hadn't read, or I hadn't known him. But the travel memoir part of it, because the way we travel is so different now, because the way we live is so different now. He wrote that in 1955, and it was about life from 1939 to 1955 in France and Australia, perspectives on art, currency, eating, traveling. For a travel memoir to be published in 1955, they required things like road names and directions, and this particular road needed to be listed, detailed reviews of restaurants, and talking about the proprietor. We have the internet now. We have TripAdvisor. We have travel Lonely Planet books, guides to every town in France. So you don't write a travel memoir like that now. So what I had difficulty with was, the whole problem that I had was I was pitching it as a memoir. I was saying this is a found memoir of someone who went from Australia to France straight after World War II. And, there's lots of it was living history at the time, because he was moving through France at that time, interacting with people who had been in hiding from the Germans during World War II, for example. There is one particular anecdote where he talks to a man at a cafe in the south of France who got his friend to chop his arm off or something, because he didn't want to be taken by, he didn't want to fight for the Germans, something like that. But, there's these amazing anecdotes and recounting of people that he met in his travels across France. But it is not at heart a character narrative. And this is why I had such trouble getting it traditionally published. And when I wrote a proposal for it. Actually, I wrote two different proposals for it. I wrote an introduction to it. I actually collated and edited the travel memoir, what I was calling the travel memoir, with more than 10 pieces of published and unpublished essays that he'd written later in his life about that time. And I'd also mixed that in with some information that I gathered from handwritten letters and diaries to basically form that a condensed story of that time. So 1939, when war broke out, and then he went to serve in the Australian version of the Commandos, to then making the decision to go to France, and then travelling around France, and then making the decision to come back to Australia in 1955. But I have finally had a realisation, because the offers that I had from traditional publishers, it was I had an offer of publication from an independent publisher, and I also had an interest from a top 5 publisher. And they wanted me to write introductory chapters to each section. They wanted me to meld my writing with his. And I didn't want to do that because I felt that I had done that, and I have done that with A Letter from Paris. So if you haven't read it, A Letter from Paris is my memoir. It is my story of discovering his life in France and who he was after a family in France contacted me to say that their grandmother had a stack of letters written about him, and she died the day before, just speaking of him. So that is my memoir, that is my story, and I weave in a lot of the found material into A Letter from Paris. But at heart, it is a memoir, and it's classified as a literary memoir on the back. The reason this was published is not because my dad was famous and not because I'm famous. It is because it is a narrative on a relatable topic in a very a compelling time. There was a very strong hook. You need a strong hook to sell a memoir if you're not a celebrity. If you are a celebrity, the world already knows your hook. That's probably why you're famous. And there's a whole lot of other aspects that go into selling a memoir and writing one that will sell to the traditional publishing market. But I want to come back very quickly. Well, actually, this is the basis for this lesson is what I learnt through these traditional publishers who did want Dad's book, France in the 50s, as I had pitched it, but they wanted me to add my own perspectives and thread that throughout, so a weaving. And so what they were really asking me to do was to turn it into a character narrative, because that is what sells. That is what sells memoir. And my blind spot with this, and the reason that I just couldn't understand why it was getting rejected as is, because I'd done so much work. I cannot describe how much work it was to condense his material into one solid narrative. It took me years. And it was editing, and it was transcribing, and it was from various libraries and collections, and so much fact checking. But that's all brain work. That's not the heart work of memoir. Is deep, and it is about your character. And so this is what I really want to say is, if you want to get a personal story traditionally published, a book-length personal story traditionally published, not if you want to self-publish a memoir, you need to have this desire that I did to create a work of literary art that sits on its own in bookstores and people buy it, people want to read it, even though you are not famous. You need to do the work of memoir. And it is, I actually believe it is the hardest genre to write. It is the reason I say this, because this is why it's taken me a while to get to the point. This is why I said no to those top 5 publishers who wanted Dad's book if I wrote the introduction to every single chapter. Basically, if I wrote my own story throughout it. I wanted his work to stand alone. But also because I had done the grueling work of that with A Letter from Paris, and I didn't want to, I'm not ready to go through all of that again. I might in the future. I'm not saying that I won't ever do that, but I know how much this took out of me, and this is really this is what they are asking me to do, and this is what memoir is. It is a character narrative. So that means it's more psychologically. It's like you have to be. Writing comes from the heart, I believe. Personal writing comes from the heart, creative writing. Editing comes from the head, the intellect. And with memoir, I do think that it is so tough, literary memoir particularly, because you need to meld both of those things. You need to write from the heart, because it is all about telling the truth about yourself more than anybody else. It's a heroic story of your own human journey. And it is a section or a piece of your life that you have chosen to focus on and write about. And at heart, it is a story. It is not a collection of memories. It is not a collection of diary entries. It is not a collection of anecdotes or examples or case studies. Every other type of nonfiction is so much easier than memoir. And fiction, I believe, is easier than memoir because I do think to write good fiction well, you need to know a lot about story, and that is tough. But with memoir, you need to know a lot about story. You need to be a novelist in your approach to understanding story arcs, narrative trajectory, pacing, plot, voice, tone, style. You need to have the skill of a novelist, and you also need the self-awareness of of a of someone who is not afraid to look into their heart and also step outside themselves and examine their own stories. And this is something that I want to share as well. The reason that I do believe that memoir is a lot tougher than fiction or other types of nonfiction, such as a collection of case studies or even a how-to guide or I used to write a lot of articles for psychology and health and wellbeing magazines and newspaper supplements. And it was fun because I got to explore a topic and simplify it and get it into, say, 1,000 to 2,000 words. I wasn't doing, you can explore a topic in a book-length work of nonfiction without doing a massive character study of yourself. So this is the thing with Dad's memoir, and I just need to let myself say this without sort of thinking about how it's going to sound. So there was a point when the second or third publisher had said no to Dad's book and wanted me to write a whole lot of extra material and start, writing it from my perspective again, where I just went, no, that's just so much work. And because I knew, because I'd written a letter from Paris, which was, condensing the two. And also, when I kept going back to the manuscript and adding more from other letters, I was thinking, okay, it doesn't have this piece of the trajectory. So coming back to that idea of we need to write like we are novelists. So I looked at the manuscript of what I had turned his book into, and I was like, yeah, okay, they're right. It is at this point, it is a lot of information and anecdotes and stories and history, but there is no. I am not there's gaps here, there, everywhere. I don't know why he's there and why he wanted to move there, and that's. That is not compelling to me. We're zooming out to historical information or academic kind of history here. And that is, this is why I wanted to share this example as well. Lily Koppel, the Red Leather Diary, which is basically, I had this in my comparative titles for the book proposal for Dad's book. And, agents and publishers made offers because they wanted me to do this. And I realized because my dad isn't alive anymore, I can't get that character stuff. I can't dive into his character and get that information, because at heart, a memoir is a character narrative. It is a story, and the character and the reason that it compels us so much, and even my Salinger year, it isn't about J.D. Salinger. It's about Joanna Rakoff. It's a coming-of-age memoir set in a literary agency in New York, and it's about her. He is an important element to the story, but every memoir is at heart the narrative of its author. And to understand narrative, and this is what I teach in depth in The Art of Memoir, and why I guess I recommend that, and why I did follow that whole process to simplify what was an incredibly complex story, psychologically, personally to me, and also, weaving through my father's story in A Letter from Paris, is because the hero's journey arc that I used and I teach, along with other stuff like these other important novelist and writing and plotting devices, is gives you a framework to dive into your character journey. And these are the memoirs that appeal to a wide audience, that get picked up for Netflix films and series. They are at heart a relatable human story of a heroic journey or change or challenge. We want to know how to live on this earth, what to do with our things. And I talk about, the 4 relatable themes: love and relationships, money and economics, health and the human body, and power and status. Those 4 relatable themes that affect how we exist on this earth. They are so important to memoir, because that character journey compels a reader because it deals with one of those themes in depth. And so you need to go deep to write a memoir. This is the difference between a memoir that is, you just want to hand it over and self-publish it, or just get it out there, and it's not actually a compelling narrative. This is the work of memoir. And I just want you to know that it is deep work. It is meaningful work. And these are the books that compel readers across the world who don't even know you to pick up that book, like Cheryl Strayed's Wild. That just had me bawling in the middle of the night, turning the pages. It's a relatable story, and it is a work of art from the everyday that she's made. She's made the everyday into a work of literary art, and that is work. And it is not, a collection of your favorite diary entries. It's not even a collection of travel anecdotes from the 1950s. Back then, a travel log would have been published, like he had written it. And I've since, found books in op shops and thrift stores and things that were published in the 50s that are very similar. And it's because we lived differently then, and people wanted a different thing from a travel story. But we have all that information about roads and maps and who runs what hotel. We can get that online now. What we want from a story, from a personal story, is depth, and we want art, and we want truth, and we want that author to take us on a journey. And I think about the best memoirs that I've read, literary memoirs, and even I use my Salinger year a lot as an example, because it helped me when I was forming my process to write A Letter from Paris. The best memoirs are those memoirs that you don't have that sense that that someone is working to convince you of anything. You don't have that sense of the work that's gone into it. You don't have the sense of the psychological deep diving that has gone into this author taking out possibly 60,000 words and turning that into one paragraph because it didn't need to be in the story. That's what I did with A Letter from Paris. I wrote 60,000 words in one of my first drafts, and I ended up, I realized, because this is the work of memoir, you get everything down on the page, and you see it as a story, because our life is a story, and you don't even know the story you're telling yourself until you've got it out on the page. So you never send that first draft to anyone. That is not a publication standard memoir. So then you zoom out and you come back and you go, okay, readers want a journey here. Readers want a story. Readers want an epic, heroic quest. We want heroes. This is why celebrities are celebrities, because usually they've gone so stratospheric in something that they've accomplished or done or achieved, or just visibly done that we go, wow, that's possible, or wow, that's crazy, or wow, that's, I could never do that, or I don't want to do that. The memoirs that I believe move millions of people across the planet for the reason that they do are these ones that tap into this human, heroic, sort of superhero perspective. And this is why the hero's journey is so powerful as a memoir framework, particularly because it shows you that you are the hero. You could walk down the street and every single person that you pass is going through their own internal, they're the star of their show. And we are all going through this in all our different ways. And another thing I want to say is finding your comparative titles is so important. And the reason why comparative titles need to be traditionally published if you want to write a memoir is because that will show you what I was not seeing, because I found it very, very difficult to find a comparative title for Dad's book. So comparative titles, if you haven't watched any of the trainings or videos on that, need to be published in the last 5 years, preferably traditionally published. They need to be memoir. If you are pitching a memoir, they need to be in that category. But the thing is, and this is quite inspiring, you could have 2, 3, 4, 5 people, 100 people writing about the same theme, the same topic, could even be born in the same town or come from the same family, or have done the same amazing thing, say broken a world record or whatever, but that their memoir is going to be so different if they do it in this deep way, in this character narrative diving way. Each of those stories is going to be so different and so heroic for different reasons, because every human has a different character. And this is why I believe, memoir can inspire and connect with us so much, because it shows us what we were capable of. It shows us how, these incredible stories, and it shows us that it's not personal. It's not personal in terms of, what you are doing or what you are dealing with. Every human on the planet is dealing with, or, most of them. And that's why I talk about make sure you understand your relatable theme, because that's how you know that your story is relatable. Your personal story is a relatable story. But then you're going to take the reader on a journey through diving into your character and what made you make the decisions you did, what made you desire something over another thing, what made you take the left turn over the right, what made you go that way, what made you angry, sad, bitter, fearful, afraid, triumphant, courageous. That is the journey that you're taking a reader on with a memoir. And that requires deep diving. And it also requires the best skills of an editor in terms of objectivity. You are not sending off that first draft. You are sitting with it, leaving it for a bit and coming back to it with that precision of a narrator who needs to see, okay, does this serve the story? And you are also writing from the heart, and your purpose in a memoir, in writing a compelling narrative memoir, is to get to the truth. It is not to vent or get back at people or prove that you're the only person that could have done this particular thing. We're all the same. We are all capable of amazing things, and we are all struggling with big and little things. Your job as the author is to write from the heart, be as honest as you can about your own character journey, and not be afraid to look at it, get it out on the page, and then zoom out and be your best editor. This is why this is why memoir is more difficult, I believe, than fiction or any other type of nonfiction. And also why you can't hire an editor. You can't just go and get an editor to do the second, third, fourth draft of a memoir. it needs to be you. That is where the change happens. That is where the magic happens in the story. Someone asked me once if it was cathartic to write a letter from Paris. And it's not the right word. I had a writer in The Art of Memoir who finished her book in 6 weeks after working on it for 4 years, as soon as she joined The Art of Memoir, which I just find amazing. And she's a changed person. I could see it because she's got to this truth piece of it all, which I believe is the real work of memoir. And she said it was a cathartic, it was really, really cathartic. But I think there needs to be a better word than cathartic. It's a deep dive and also a purification and a complete retelling and a rechanging. It is restructuring and rewiring the narrative of your own life. And this is why it is work. And this is why ultimately, the book that I was pitching as a memoir, which was really a collection of stories, anecdotes, pieces, essays and pieces and things like that. It didn't have this depth and journey, the character journey that publishers wanted from a literary memoir. And my dad's no longer alive, so I can't, I would need to be making up a lot of stuff to give that a journey. If it was fiction, sure, I could make up a lot of, challenges and villains and blocking points and, change the pacing. But I can only go with the written material that I've been given because he's no longer alive. So it's up to me if I want to write the story that they will publish. It needs to be a character narrative. It needs to have a lot of my own character in it, very much like Lily Koppel did so well in the Red Leather Diary, because what she did, and I haven't explained yet, what she did was Lily Koppel was a journalist and she found this journal in a bin or a dumpster or something in New York. And it was this amazing diary of a woman who had lived in New York in the 1920s, I think. Anyway, she ended up tracking her down and she tells the story. So you're not just getting the diary printed word for word in, that's out of it. You're not just getting I think it's Florence. Her name was Florence. The name of the author of the diary. It was in a steamer trunk. And it was there for more than a century, it says. Well, half a century. Very similar story to my finding my dad's book that had just been, locked in a box in the caverns of the state library, been there for 50 years. And my dad's diary had been there, and his journals and his book had been there for over 40 years. But we're not just getting the diary printed and typed here. Lily weaves, and I know the work that would have gone into this. Lily Koppel weaves entries from the diary with the story of finding the diary, finding Florence, and fleshing out those pieces that of the character arc and narrative in the diary. And so it is a compelling page-turning story, because that's what I can't do with my dad's book, because because he's no longer alive. And so I really want to share that, because and Lily interviewed and spoke with Florence a lot. So that's how she did, weave that in. But it's also Lily's story too, because she's very expertly woven through that narrative of finding it. And it's a page turner in that way, because you think, oh, does she find her? Where is she? What happened next? What piece of the diary is she reading now? And she talks about what was going on in her life when she found it. So there's that compelling element. So I guess to simplify it, a memoir needs to be a story. And to make that compelling, because it's personal story, it's not fiction, you need to be, if you're not a celebrity and you're not a world famous politician or tennis player or famous, uh, you need to have a compelling character. To have a compelling character, you need to know your character. You need to know why you did certain things, and you need to deep dive. And so this is why I teach the hero's journey, because it's a psychological process of character development. We go through these journeys every day, every hour, every year of our lives. And when you apply that to the narrative structure of story, for memoir, it is incredibly helpful. So I really hope this has cleared up a few things about the genre of memoir. It's not just a collection of diary notes, and it is work, and it is not your first draft. And I really admire anyone who can get a memoir traditionally published, because I know how much work it is, not just in terms of the writing and the being brave and bold enough to put yourself out there and pitch it and speak about your story. Often people who write memoirs have something very it might have been painful or very vulnerable or personal. So that takes a whole different level of skill to pitching a fiction book or a nonfiction that's not a memoir. But particularly if you're writing a memoir that contains another person's story, like Lily Coppell's memoir, like A Letter from Paris, that had biographical stuff about my dad. It's this work of making it seamless to the reader, that you're meshing both stories and you're turning it into one comprehensible, cohesive story that people can follow, and they're not constantly coming out of it and going, hang on, what? You just said that person did that. What do you through repetition or just flatlining the story without any new compelling pieces. That is the real work of memoir. So I hope this has helped. In terms of my dad's book, I'm just leaving it for the moment because I love teaching memoir, and I have his stuff all typed up and digitized now, and that was a huge task in itself. And for the publishers that have made offers on it, they want me to basically do another version of A Letter from Paris, and I'm not ready to do that yet. I might do it in the future, but yeah. So I hope that this helps you understand that memoir is probably the most difficult genre in the literary arts to master, and my hat goes off to you if you've done it. And that was a realization that I came to when I was saying no to the publishers who said they did want Dad's book if I did certain things to make it a memoir. It is a lot of work. That was what I realized. And maybe I have been doing a disservice by oversimplifying it, because you need to know that you are ready to do that work. It's psychological deep diving. I had I'll just finish up with a story. I had a writer contact me. She'd written her memoir, and she'd even pitched it and sold it. It was a memoir based on finding out something about a family member, and she'd sold it to a publisher, and but she didn't want to do any more work on it. That first draft took everything out of her, and she actually wanted me to rewrite it for her, which I don't do. I do not do that. And I think that she had got herself into an unfortunate situation with a big publisher, because when you pitch and get commissioned to write a memoir, and I sold A Letter from Paris on proposal, so it didn't. I hadn't written the manuscript, and this is the risk that they took with me, and this is the risk when you do sell on proposal with memoir. Was this writer who contacted me just didn't have it in her to do any more work on it. That first draft had been enough. And that's not a book. The first draft is not a book, because she just got her first edits back from the publisher, because that's the thing. They will need you to make changes. Just even if they've said yes to the manuscript, if you've just sold your manuscript on, you've submitted the full manuscript and the agent or the publisher said, yes, this is great, you still need to do more work on it. And it's in this revision process that you actually learn the most about yourself and the story, and you make the best, you do the best writing, I believe. That was when it became artful for me, when I was, when I'd gotten that first agony draft out of the way, and when I had chopped out those 60,000 word sort of vomit pieces that needed to come out for me to see what had happened, but didn't need to be included in the story. When I then got to condense and restructure and rethread and rearrange pieces for myself, which is sort of editing and revision work that I teach in the manuscript finishing school piece of it, that is when the changes start to really take place in your head and you understand your story from a totally different perspective. And that is the work and that is when it becomes so fulfilling, and you realize how much you've changed on an internal level. But you can't outsource that. And that's why you can't just outsource the second or third draft. That is when the art comes in. That is when I believe you become a real author, is through those revision drafts and really understanding your story. It is deep. It is deep work. It takes heart and brain at the same time, and you need a lot of rest while you're doing it. So I hope this has clarified a little bit more about the genre of literary memoir.